Sometimes the smallest moments carry the heaviest weight. A simple trip to the corner store, the jingle of a bell over the door, the sound of loose change clinking against a counter, those things can tell the story of a whole life. On that cold Boston evening, Mary Mitchell walked into the store with her 6-month-old daughter Janice pressed tightly against her chest. She wasn't there to browse, wasn't there for herself. She was there for one thing, a can of formula that her sick baby desperately needed. Mary was only 27, but hardship had already carved lines of worry around her eyes. Her thin coat hung loosely from her frame, her hands raw and red from the bitter wind outside. In her arms, Janice shifted weakly, her tiny head resting against her mother's shoulder. The baby's cheeks were flushed with fever, her breath short and wheezy. Every cough rattled through her small chest like a storm trying to break free. Mary had counted the coins in her pocket twice before leaving their small, drafty apartment. Quarters, dimes, nickels, and even 2 dull pennies she had dug from under the couch cushions. It was all she had left. She'd skipped meals before, breakfast, lunch, and sometimes dinner too, but she told herself that didn't matter. What mattered was her daughter. Tonight, Janice needed that special gentle care formula, the one the pediatrician had recommended after 3 miserable nights of nonstop crying, vomiting, and rashes that left the baby screaming in pain. Mary had promised herself she would get it no matter what. She stepped up to the counter, setting the can down carefully. One by one, she placed the coins in a neat row, as if arranging them with precision might make the pile seem like more than it was. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with soft eyes behind silver-rimmed glasses, counted the change gently, her red sweater glowing in the store's bright lights. And then came the words that made Mary's stomach twist. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Prices went up last month. It's $24.16 with tax." Mary blinked, her throat closing. She thought she had enough. She thought she had counted right. But the woman's tone wasn't unkind. It was simply matter of fact. Mary's eyes dropped to the counter. She was $3.18 short. The store felt suddenly too warm, too quiet. Behind her a line had formed. A man coughed impatiently. A teenage girl popped gum, snapping it loud enough to make the silence heavier. Mary's cheeks burned. She clutched Janice tighter, rocking her gently as the baby whimpered, whispering against her damp hair, "Shh, baby girl, I've got you." Her pride screamed at her to pull the can back, to say nothing, to leave. But her daughter's shallow, rattling breaths kept her frozen in place. Janice couldn't wait. Mary reached slowly toward the can, ready to walk away with nothing but disappointment, when the air shifted behind her. The shuffle of footsteps, the quiet presence of someone stepping closer. A man's hand reached past her, sliding a sleek black credit card onto the counter. His voice, calm and steady, carried across the silence. "Put it on my card. She's short, honey, 318. The words landed like a thunderclap. Mary turned her head slightly, startled. The cashier hesitated, looking first at the card, then at the man. His presence wasn't loud or demanding, yet it carried a weight that hushed the room. Joseph Westridge stood tall in a tailored charcoal coat, polished shoes glinting against the sticky linoleum. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed back, his face composed in a way that spoke of control, discipline, and years of people listening when he talked. He didn't glance at the restless customers in line. He didn't explain himself. He only repeated, gently but firmly, "Put it on my card." Mary's heart pounded. She adjusted Janice, who stirred against her chest, and managed a low voice, sharper than she intended. "I don't want your pity." Joseph's eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. "It's not pity," he said softly. "It's just kindness. And it looks like you could use some today." Something in the way he said it, without judgment, without pressure, broke through her defenses. The cashier exhaled as if she too had been holding her breath. She rang up the purchase. The machine beeped, approved, and spat out the receipt. Joseph didn't even glance at the screen. He simply handed the bag to Mary with quiet finality. Her pride battled against her exhaustion. But when Janice whimpered again, hotter now with fever, Mary's shoulders sank. She accepted the bag, her voice barely audible. "Thank you." Joseph only nodded. No smile, no grand gesture, just a nod, respectful and calm. Then, almost as an afterthought, he pulled something from his pocket. A small, frayed teddy bear keychain, its ears worn from age. He crouched slightly so his eyes were level with Janice's. "This helped my niece once," he said, his voice gentler than before. "She had night terrors after her mother passed. I carried it for weeks until she finally slept. Maybe it'll help her too." Mary stared at the bear, her throat aching. Slowly, she reached out. Her fingers brushed his as she took it. Janice's tiny hand immediately latched onto the bear, pressing it against her red cheeks. The sight pulled. A quiet sniff from the cashier, who turned quickly to straighten the gum rack. "That was a kind thing you did," she murmured. Joseph stood to his full height, giving her a single nod. "Sometimes the world is too loud," he said. "Quiet kindness goes a long way." Mary turned then, boots scuffing softly against the floor. She didn't look back. She didn't say more. She just pushed through the door into the cold evening air. The bell chimed overhead and she was gone, like so many women before her, swallowed by the night. Joseph lingered a moment, tucking the receipt into his wallet. The line behind him shuffled forward. A man grumbled. Someone else placed a case of beer on the counter. The world moved on, but Joseph didn't, not right away. He stepped into the sharp wind, his collar pulled up against the cold. Snowflakes fell under the orange glow of the streetlights, dotting his coat. Down the block, Mary's silhouette was already fading into the dark, her thin frame hunched against the rain that had begun to fall. One arm clutched the white bag, the other held her sick baby close. She walked quickly, not from fear, but from necessity. A mother's urgency. Joseph's breath misted in the air as he watched her. Something inside him stirred. She hadn't asked for help. She probably never did, and yet she was giving everything she had for that child. He walked toward his car, a sleek black sedan waiting beneath a flickering lamppost. His hand touched the door handle but paused. He glanced back again. Through the curtain of rain, he saw her still moving, still fighting the night with every weary step, and something in his gut told him this wasn't the end of it. The rain thickened, soaking the sidewalks, drumming against his shoulders. Mary pulled her hood tighter over Janice, whispering softly, though her baby's coughs only grew harsher. Her arms ached from holding her close, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Then came the low hum of an engine pulling up beside her. Headlights cut through the mist. A sleek sedan slowed to match her pace. The passenger window rolled down, and there he was again, Joseph Westridge, eyes steady on her. "You shouldn't be out here with a sick baby," he said, voice calm, unwavering. "Let me drive you to the hospital." Mary froze, raindrops streaming from her lashes. Janice coughed, her tiny fist tightening in the folds of her mother's coat. Exhaustion pressed against Mary like a wall. She looked at the car, then at her child, then back at him. "Why?" she asked, not with suspicion, only with tiredness. Joseph's grip tightened slightly on the wheel. "Because she needs help, and because I don't want to regret not offering." Mary hesitated only a second longer before Janice's labored cough made the choice for her. She nodded once. The door clicked open. Mary slid inside, clutching her daughter tightly. The warmth of the car wrapped around her immediately. The smell of leather, faint cologne, and baby powder from Janice's blanket filling the air. For a while, Joseph said nothing. He drove smoothly through the wet streets, wipers sweeping back. and forth, headlights gleaming against puddles. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "What's your name?" Mary brushed damp hair from her face, her voice quiet but steady. "Mary Mitchell." Joseph's head turned slightly, surprise flickering. Across his expression, "You used to work at Westridge." Mary looked over at him, startled. "You remember?" "I do," he said. "You were nominated for the Elevate program 2 years ago. Then one day you were just gone." Mary let out a soft, dry laugh. "Yeah, that sounds about right." Joseph waited. "My husband left. When I was 6 months pregnant," she continued quietly. "He said he wasn't ready to be a father. I tried to keep working, but things spiraled fast. I didn't know how to show up in a boardroom when I couldn't even afford childcare or rent. The car slowed at a red light. Rain pattered against the roof. I didn't mean to disappear," she added, eyes on the blurred city through the window. "I just didn't know how to stay." Joseph didn't respond. He simply nodded. The kind of nod that said, "I hear you," not "I feel sorry for you." You were never an "I told you." As they drove on, the silence settled gently between them, not awkward, but respectful. In the rearview mirror, Joseph stole a glance. He saw Mary rocking Janice gently in her arms, murmuring something soft, a lullaby, maybe. One hand cradled the baby's head, the other wiped at her own cheek. Tears mixed with rain had begun to fall, but she didn't let herself break. Not fully. She sang through it. Joseph's fingers gripped the wheel tighter. He didn't know what he was doing exactly, but he knew one thing, as the hospital sign came into view through the mist. He was glad he had turned the car around. The emergency room was quiet in the early evening lull, filled only with the occasional beep of machines and the low murmur of nurses moving through, halls. Mary sat stiffly in the corner of the pediatric wing. Janice cradled in her arms, bundled in a warm hospital blanket. The doctor had just stepped out after explaining the diagnosis: mild pneumonia, likely brought on by the cold and prolonged exposure. Janice would need monitoring for a few hours, a prescription for antibiotics and rest. Nothing life-threatening, but serious enough to make Mary's heart ache with guilt and fear. Mary stared down at her daughter, gently brushing the damp wisps of hair from her flushed forehead. The baby had finally stopped coughing and fallen into a restless sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in short, shallow breaths. She hadn't noticed Joseph was still there until she looked up. He sat on the bench opposite her, arms resting on his knees, tie slightly loosened. His gaze wasn't on his phone or the clock or even on her. It was on Janice. Quiet, patient. "You didn't have to stay," Mary said softly. Joseph turned his head, offering a small shrug. "I know." Mary hesitated. She wanted to ask why, but the exhaustion pulled too hard on her voice. Her body, drained of every reserve, slowly gave in. Her eyes closed. Still holding Janice close, she let her head fall back against the wall, and sleep overtook her. When she awoke, the lights were dimmer, and the world felt quieter. Janice was still in her arms, breathing steadily now. There was a thin blanket over Mary's legs that hadn't been there before. She sat up slowly, her joints stiff. Something crinkled in her pocket. Frowning, she reached in and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a hospital payment receipt, fully paid. Her throat tightened. She looked around. Joseph was sitting just outside the room now, sipping a cup of hospital coffee. When he saw her stir, he stood and stepped inside, careful not to startle her. "You paid?" Mary asked quietly, holding up the receipt. He nodded once. "It wasn't much. I figured you had enough on your plate." She opened her mouth to protest but couldn't find the words. Joseph ran a hand over the back of his neck. "I didn't do it to offend you, Mary. I've been here before. Not in your shoes exactly, but close enough to remember what it feels like. Mary studied him, brows drawn in cautious curiosity. My sister, he continued, voice low. She was a single mom, 2 jobs, no support. I kept saying I'd help her more. Visit, send, money, call. But work always came first. I was too late. He looked away for a moment, as if the memory still lived somewhere too raw. She passed away years ago. Pneumonia. She ignored it until it was too far gone. Her daughter was 4. Mary's breath caught. She lowered her eyes to Janice. I made a lot of excuses back then, Joseph added, about being busy, about life getting in the way. I think today I just didn't want to make another one. Silence hung between them, soft and heavy, the kind of silence that made room for honesty. Mary's defenses, slowly eroded by exhaustion and truth, gave way. She looked up at him. Really? Looked. And for the first time that day, her face softened. I'm sorry about your sister, she said quietly. Joseph offered a small nod. Thank you. A pause. Then gently, he stepped closer, lowering himself to her level. He reached out, not boldly, just enough to rest a hand lightly on her shoulder, barely there, almost asking for permission. Mary didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let the weight of it settle, warm and grounding. She exhaled slowly, closing her eyes again for a brief moment. And when she opened them, she whispered, "Thank you for staying." Joseph's voice was almost a murmur, of course. And in that quiet room, under the hum of fluorescent lights and the steady breath of a sleeping child, a woman who had forgotten what safety felt like sat beside a man who had once failed someone and refused to do. Itagain, it wasn't a beginning. Not yet. But it was no longer just survival. It was something more. The apartment was quiet. Janice was finally asleep after a long, exhausting day, her fever subsiding bit by bit. Mary stood by the window, phone in hand, the glow of the screen lighting her tired face. She hesitated before typing. Thank you for everything. I don't think I could have made it through yesterday without you. She stared at the message a moment, thumb hovering above sand. Then she hid it. Across town, in a high-rise suite lit by city. Lights and spreadsheets, Joseph Westridge read the text. He didn't smile, not fully, but his shoulders relaxed and his eyes lingered on the message longer than necessary. It wasn't pity, it was curiosity, respect, and something else he wasn't ready to name. But as he set the phone down, a name popped into his mind, one that had itched at the back of his thoughts ever since their conversation in the car. James Barrett. Something about it didn't sit right. He turned to his laptop and opened the internal applicant review portal for Westridge Industries. Dozens of candidates had submitted proposals and portfolios recently, but one file caught his attention. His charming manners, James Barrett. Joseph clicked. The resume was polished. Too polished. It spoke of executive-level experience, strategy development, leadership, and marketing. The last position listed, Senior Campaign Director, Westridge Pilot, Division. Except Joseph didn't recall ever seeing James's name in connection with that role. He narrowed his eyes and scanned the project attached to the file, one of the company's most successful community outreach campaigns from years ago. Mary's name had been on that project at James. Joseph double-checked the old employee records. The initiative had been designed by Mary Mitchell, then a junior manager, under mentorship by the department head. There was no mention of James Barrett. In the archives, his blood cooled. He kept scrolling, digging into James's background, linked profiles, social presence, media mentions. One article stopped him cold. Westridge Industries welcomes James Barrett to final round. Engaged to Catherine Montrose, daughter of key investor. Joseph leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightened. This wasn't just an ex-husband with a bruised ego. This was a fraudster repackaging stolen work as his own. Worse, He was leveraging that false reputation to secure a role in the very company Mary had helped build now with the backing of one of their biggest investment families. It was a scandal, waiting to detonate, a risk not just to Mary's dignity, but to the entire Westridge brand. Joseph stood from his chair. The next day, he called Mary. They met at a small cafe not far from her apartment. It was quiet, cozy, tucked between two bookstores. Mary arrived bundled in Athic coat. Janice at home with a neighbor. She looked stronger. But the worry hadn't left her eyes. "What's going on?" she asked, sliding into the booth across from him. Joseph didn't waste time. He pulled out his tablet and turned it toward her, showing the resume. Mary froze. The photo, the job title, the project. Her eyes moved quickly down the screen, hands trembling slightly. "He used that campaign," she whispered. Joseph nodded. "Claimed. Full authorship, claimed your work, and now he's one step away from an executive role at Westridge." Mary leaned back, stunned, and Catherine Montrose engaged, Joseph confirmed. "She's the daughter of the Montrose Fund chair. If this goes public, the entire relationship between our companies is at risk." Mary pressed her lips together, trying to steady her breath, but her eyes welled anyway. "Used me," she said, voice breaking. "He left when I needed him most. And no, he's erasing me from the record, from everything." Joseph didn't reach out. He didn't interrupt. He just let her sit with the truth. Let her feel it, name it. And when she finally looked up, there was something different in her face. Not just grief. Resolve. Mary stepped into the Westridge headquarters like someone walking into a memory she had tried hard to forget. The towering glass lobby was exactly how she remembered it. Cool, clean, humming with quiet confidence. She held her coat close around her and reminded herself that she wasn't here for a handout. She'd been here before. Once. For very different reasons. She belonged once. Maybe she still did. Joseph met her at the elevator dressed in a slate blue suit, no tie. He offered a calm smile, then turned and led the way without small talk. When they reached his office, he motioned for her to sit. She did. On the desk in front of her was a folder. Her name, Mary Mitchell, was typed cleanly on the front label. Joseph slid it toward her. "Take your time. Read it through." She opened it slowly, unsure what to expect. Inside was a formal job offer. Director of Community Engagement, Westridge Impact. Initiative, flexible hours, on-site childcare, competitive pay, direct input into company policy for social outreach programs. Mary's breath hitched. She turned the page. Her name was already on the contract. The start date had been filled in just 3 days from now. The file had been signed off by both Joseph and the board. Her fingers trembled slightly as she closed the folder. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "This is a real position, a big one. Why me? Why now?" Joseph leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice soft but unwavering. "Because I saw you," he said, "at that store, at the hospital, holding your daughter like the world depended on it. And maybe it did. You fought for her. You didn't flinch. You didn't complain. You just did what had to be done." He paused. "And because I've made the mistake before of not seeing people like you until it was too late, I'm not making that mistake again." Mary's eyes shimmered. Her throat tightened. She looked down at the contract again. Her name printed neatly seemed unreal. "This isn't pity?" she asked, more vulnerable than she meant to be. Joseph shook his head. "It's not charity, Mary. It's acknowledgement. You earned this years ago. I'm just making sure you don't get erased." She nodded slowly, absorbing every word. Then her tone changed, more certain. "And what about James?" Joseph folded his hands. "I won't use you to bring him down. That's not your burden to carry. This position is yours, whether or not you want to say anything. The board already approved it." Mary studied him. The way he sat, the weight behind his words. She remembered the night in the hospital, the softness in his voice when he spoke about his sister. The way he didn't ask her for anything in return, but still, she knew. "I will," she said, lifting her chin. "I'll say something." Joseph looked at her, brows gently furrowed. "You don't have to." "I want to," she said. "Not for revenge, but because his silence made me feel like I never existed. Like everything I did, everything I gave was nothing." Her hand tightened on the edge of the desk. "I want to say it where it matters, where he matters, at the gala, in front of them all." Joseph exhaled slowly. Ben nodded. "I'll stand behind you," he said. "Whatever happens." Mary gave a small, grateful smile, then stood, holding the contract to her chest. As she turned to leave, she looked back once, her voice quieter now. "Thank you for seeing me." Joseph didn't smile, but the look in his eyes was warmer than any smile could have been. The Westridge Gala was nothing short of spectacular. Crystal chandeliers glistened above the grand ballroom. Waiters and black ties moved seamlessly through crowds holding champagne flutes. Laughter mingled with jazz from a live quartet on stage. It was a night for celebration, for reputation, for power. The kind of night where eyes lingered longer than words. But all of that paused the moment Mary Mitchell stepped through the main doors. Every head turned. She stood radiant in a deep sea-green gown that flowed like silk water, simple but undeniable, her hair swept back in elegant waves. In her arms, not a handbag but confidence, grace. And beside her, calm and poised in a black suit, was Joseph Westridge. A whisper swept through the room like a hush before a storm. "That's Mary Mitchell. He used to be one of ours. She's back." Mary heard it all, but none of it touched her now. She moved with purpose. She was not here to impress. She was here to speak. They made their way across the room slowly. Mary caught familiar faces, former colleagues, HR executives, a few people who once praised her work and then vanished when she fell. Not one of them could meet her gaze for long. Then he appeared. James Barrett. He crossed the room quickly, finding ease. His tux was sharp, his smile rehearsed. Catherine Montreux, glittering in diamonds, trailed just behind him. "Well," James said, stopping in front of them, his voice casual but strained. "Didn't expect to see you here tonight." Mary met his eyes, calm, clear. "No," she said. "You expected me to stay erased." James chuckled, awkward. "Mary, come on, let's not make a scene." "You lied," she said louder now. "Not just about your past, but about mine, too." The music dimmed behind them. A few nearby guests turned to listen. "You took the projects I created. You rewrote history and signed your name where mine used to be." James shifted. "That's not fair." She turned to Catherine, locking eyes, with the woman whose last name could buy entire cities. "You know he lied," Mary said, her voice steady. "You've seen the inconsistencies. The question isn't whether it's true. The question is, will you still marry the lie?" Silence. Catherine said nothing, but her hand slowly dropped from James's arm. Joseph stepped forward, then, not to grandstand, not to attack, but to hand a sealed folder to a nearby board member. It was discreet, professional. Inside, evidence of James's fabricated resume, false project credits, and internal references flagged by the company's ethics team. It had already been reviewed. Tonight was merely the formality. The board member gave Joseph a nod, then whispered to a colleague. Within minutes, the room changed. James was pulled aside by the head of legal. Catherine stepped back, no longer beside him. And Mary. She stood tall, her posture straight, her hands calm by her sides. She had not screamed. She had not begged. She had simply told the truth in a room that once silenced it. Joseph leaned toward her, voice low and full of quiet pride. "You didn't just reclaim your name," he said. "You reminded them all what it still means." Mary turned to him, a small smile breaking across her lips. "Feels good," she admitted. "Not to be angry, just free." They didn't stay long after that. The room buzzed with speculation and shifting loyalties, but Mary had said what needed saying, and the rest was finally behind her. The new office wasn't on the top floor. It wasn't lined with glass or marble, and there was no corner view of Boston's skyline, but it had something Mary hadn't felt in a long time. Peace, the walls of the community. Impact Division were painted in warm tones. There were colorful drawings from local kids pinned on corkboards. A modest playroom sat at the end of the hallway where Janice, now stronger and breathing easy, spent a few hours each day under the gentle care of trained staff. Mary sat at her desk, a real desk, with her name etched on a brass plaque and typed out a proposal for a new after-school mentorship program. Her badge read, Mary Mitchell, Director of Community Programs. She still couldn't quite believe it, but it was real. She was back, not as someone looking for validation, but as someone who now gave others a chance to rise. Joseph never hovered. After the gala, he had returned to his usual routine, silent meetings, investor calls, running Westridge with calm precision. But here and there, small things spoke louder than words. A warm butternut squash soup scent from the executive kitchen on a cold Monday. A book on trauma-informed care, left quietly on her desk with a sticky note. Thought this might help. No pressure, Jay. A plush toy rabbit delivered to Janice's cubby with a little card. Every explorer needs a soft companion. And then one afternoon, as the last rays of sunlight painted the office in gold, Joseph appeared outside the playroom with something in his hands. He handed it to Janice first, a thick photo book with soft leather binding and a playful title in gold letters, New Beginnings. Inside were pages filled with photos of Boston parks, hand-drawn illustrations of stars and trees, and soft quotes about hope and resilience. At the very end was one blank page titled, For the Rest of Your Story When You're Ready to Write It. Mary looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at Joseph. "You matey this?" she asked. He nodded quietly. "It's for her, but also for you." She closed the book gently and stepped closer, her eyes steady but soft. "You didn't save me, Joseph," she said. "I saved myself." A pause. Then with a faint smile, shedded, "But you reminded me I was worth saving." Joseph didn't speak. He simply reached out, and for the first time she didn't pull away. Their fingers found each other calmly, confidently. The wind outside had settled. Janice was already dozing off in her stroller, the book cradled in her small lap. Joseph walked beside Mary as they exited the building, their hands still loosely intertwined. The streets of Boston glowed in thember hush of dusk. No fanfare, no dramatic music, just a woman, a man, and a child, quietly, beautifully beginning again. Because some families are not born, they're chosen. Not from rescue, but from recognition. Not because someone needed saving, but because someone chose to stay. Thank you for joining us on this journey through soul-stirring stories. The story of Mary, Janice, and Joseph, a struggling single mom, a sick baby, a stranger who chose compassion over judgment. No miracles, no saviors, just kindness at the right time and the courage to reach out when it matters most. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that new beginnings are real and that hope can find us in the darkest corners, please like, comment, and share it with someone who might need that reminder today. And don't forget to subscribe to Soul, stirring stories for more true leap tales that warm the heart, stir the soul, and remind us all of what truly matters. Because every soul deserves a story, and every story deserves to be felt. See you in the next own.